In today's video, I want to show you how to make flying geese 4 at a time. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and I'm working on a project right now, and I need to make a whole bunch of flying geese. And it's a lot easier to make multiples of them rather than making one at a time. And I found that the 4 at a time method works really well. I find it works the best for me anyway. So I wanted to go through and show you how to do that in today's video. So first off, do you know what a flying goose or flying geese looks like? It sounds weird to say what a flying geese looks like, but that's what they call these units, right? So this is what it looks like. Here's an example. And you can see that there are two different fabrics in this. So in the center here, this fabric is what we call the goose, all right? And then on either side, you have the wings, all right? So 2 units are wings, one in the center is the goose, all right? So let's talk about figuring out what size we need to cut the fabric for the goose and what size we need to cut the fabrics for the wings when we're making 4 at a time. All right, so it's a very simple method, and by the way, I like to cut my pieces a little bit bigger. I like to make my flying geese a little bit bigger and then trim them down at the end. It gives a really accurate result. So let's start. We're going to actually start with the little guys. We'll start with the little guys here, okay? Now the first thing you need to know is what is the finished size of the flying goose unit that you want to make, all right? So in the example we're talking about today, I want to make flying geese that are 2 inches in height by 4 inches in length. So typically flying geese are a 1 to 2 ratio, right? So if it was like 3 inches in height, it would be 6 inches in length, okay? That's kind of your standard sizing, how it works for flying geese units. So I need to know those measurements because that helps me figure out the size I need to cut the squares for the wings and the size for the goose, all right? So let's start first with the smaller squares, the wings. So that was 2 inches. My example is 2 inches by 4 inches. So I need to take that 2-inch measurement, the smaller measurement, and add 1 1/4 inches to it. So 2 plus 1 1/4 makes 3 1/4. So you will cut out 4 squares that are 3 1/4 inches each. All right, so the wings we've got cut. Now the goose, the center part, that measurement is the larger measurement, in our example 4 inches, and you take that and you add 1 3/4 inches to it. So 4 plus 1 3/4 is 5 3/4 inches. So you cut 1 square only for the goose, 5 3/4 inches. So those are your magic measurement numbers, right? You take the smaller measurement of the finished flying goose unit, add 1 1/4 to it, and then cut out 4 squares that are that size. You take the larger measurement, in this case 4 inches, and you cut 1 piece of fabric that is that size plus 1 3/4 inches, okay? So we've got everything cut out. What's our next step? Well, our next step is to do a little bit of marking. So you would take the wing units, okay, I'm just going to move this up out of the way here for a second. And what you're going to do is on every single one of them, you're going to flip them over. So on the back side or the wrong side, you're going to mark a diagonal line from corner to corner. So I'm using this Quilter's Magic Wand to do this. If you're not familiar with this tool, look up above or in the description below because I'll put a link there for you. And I'm just going to mark with an erasable marker. I'm going to put a line on that square on the back, and I'm going to do that for every one of them, okay? So all of them are going to be marked, okay? That's what I need to do to start. Fairly simple so far, right? Okay, then I need to get my goose. All right. So we take our goose piece, and we take the squares that we've marked, and we're going to line them up in opposite corners. We're going to work with 2 to start with. So you can see I've got this lined up here. I've got the diagonal line running down across, you know, from diagonal to diagonal on the goose piece as well. And I'm just going to pin those in place to keep them there. Sure, I'm over here. So I'm trying to keep the edges lined up this way and get that nice diagonal down. I'll show you as we add the next piece something else to consider to make sure you've got it where it should be. Okay, so the other one is going the opposite corner, another piece. And again, lining up the edges here. Okay, and I'm going to pin that in place as well. It'd be nice if I had a pin that was straight, right? Okay, pin that in place. Okay, and it might move a little bit as I, work with it, so I just make sure it's nice and that the raw edges are all lining up along, the edges here and the edges there. Okay, And the other thing I want to make sure is this diagonal line should now look like pretty much a solid diagonal line. In other words, that these two diagonal lines join up. So I don't have one that's kind of, you know, skewed like that. Okay, I want to have them both running along the same way. So this looks perfect. Now the next step is actually at the sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away on either side of that diagonal line. So let's go do that next. So now I'm at the machine and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch away on either side of that diagonal line. Okay, so I've got this all stitched on either side of that diagonal line. So the next step is to go back to the cutting table because we need to cut these apart and do some pressing. So the next step is to do some cutting. So I'm going to cut right on that diagonal line. Or close to it. That's perfectly fine. And then we need to do some pressing. So I'm going to bring back my pressing mat here. Move a few things off. And we're going to press first, just the way it is. And that will take off that heat erasable marker that I was using. Okay, and then we need to press out. Okay, we're going to press these out like this, okay? And so what I want to do is I carefully want to go along my edge. I want to make sure that this edge, this can be a little troublemaker, this guy. So I want to make sure that that's away, okay, first off. And very gently hold that away, and I'm just pressing very gently, okay? This is my first press. So I don't want to press real hard on it and distort that, all right? And then I'm going to add some easy press solution. So you might want to just starch this, and that's going to get it to lay nice and flat. Press the second one while that's sitting there for a wee bit. Again, making sure that little corner, those little corners, make sure that they're pressed right away. Okay. And if you're wondering about Easy Press solution, check up above or in the description below because I always have links for it. I use it all the time in my studio. All right, so let's press this down. So now I'm just pressing down to set those fabrics the way I have pressed them back. Get them nice and flat because we're going to use this one, these parts here, kind of unit 1, if you will, of the Flying Geese construction. We're going to use those with the remaining 2 small squares because right now it looks like we've got 2, partial Flying Geese. And with the next step, we're going to get the 4. All right. All right, so the next thing we want to do is, again, to go back to our little squares. One's going to go with one of the partial units, those unit 1s, and one's going to go with the other one. And, of course, you're going to flip them over so everything's right sides together. And this time, you're going to put the square on the corner here that doesn't have anything on it, I guess. Kind of the way, it's always hard to describe that. That's why I describe this process. So that's why doing a video works so well. Otherwise, I'm not sure how you explain this step. On the other side, there we go. And now we'll do the same thing with the second unit. So we've got that diagonal line going out right through the middle here, right through this open area, if you will. Okay, we'll get that down in there. And pin this one down as well, just to hold them in place. All right, so this is what we've got now. We've got these 2 pieces. Now, what do you think we're going to do next? Well, similar to the first step, right? We're going to go to the sewing machine. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch away, either side of the diagonal line on both of these. So let's go do that now. So, ready to do some more stitching. And we're doing the same kind of thing, 1/4 inch away on either side of that drawn diagonal line. And then we turn around and do the same thing on the opposite side. All right, so now back to the cutting table for some more cutting. So, more cutting required. All right, we've got our two little units here. This could be unit 2, I guess. Unit 1 before we got to this stage, and same thing. We're just going to cut on that drawn diagonal line. Cut them apart. Now we have 2, almost 2. There we go. From that one, and we're going to get 2 from this one, which will give us 4, but we have some more work to do because they still don't look quite like flying geese, do they? All right, so a little bit more pressing required to get them to look like this, or close to looking like that. Okay. So again, you're going to press these away, paying particular attention to the very end of that seam, on both sides really. Okay. Same thing with all the rest of them. Finally, we're getting to 4 units, right? But they're still not quite the way they should be. So after we're done our pressing, we will still have to do a bit of trimming because at a minimum, when you're making flying geese, you will have these little dog ears you're seeing out here. But in the case of how we're making these particular ones, 4 at a time, I've made them a little bit bigger, and so we need to trim them down. And you can't just go along and start hacking off pieces here, you know, on the ends and underneath and stuff. There is actually a certain way to do it to make sure that you get the type of flying geese that you want to get, okay? To make sure that they're the right measurement and everything. So we're going to go into that. Not hard to do. And as I said before, there's very little waste on these. And I always think it's better to have them a little bit bigger and trim them down. I find it gives much more accurate results. Nothing gets skewed, funny, or anything. And I'm going to talk about how to do that with a regular ruler. You can either use one of your regular acrylic rulers. You may have a rectangular ruler. I'm going to be using a square ruler for my demonstration, but you don't have to have a square ruler. But you do need to have a ruler that has a 45-degree line on it, okay? So that is something that you definitely need to have in order to trim it the way I'm going to show you. Okay. So here we go. We got our 4 little guys here. And I'm going to move this out of the way because we are now at the cutting stage again. So between cutting, sewing, pressing, cutting, sewing, pressing, there's lots going on, isn't there? So let's take a look at these. So as I mentioned, you've got these little dog ears, right? That at a minimum you would cut, you know, these off, all these little bits off. But it's still not going to be the right size, right? So for a 2x4 finished flying geese, we need 2.5 inches in height and 4.5 inches in length, okay? So let's grab a ruler. I'm going to move these out of the way so they don't get cut in the process, okay? And the first thing you want to do with your ruler is locate that 45-degree line, okay? Goes right on the diagonal. There it is there, all right? And you need to know what is that size, in this case, the unfinished size that you want your flying geese unit to be. So in our case, for a finished 2 inches by 4 inches, I know I'm repeating myself a lot, I just want to, make sure you're with me. You want to have an unfinished flying geese unit that is 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches, okay? 2.5 by 4.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our little unit, we're going to put it with the V, it's like a V shape here, right? The goose pointing down, if you will. And we're going to use that 45-degree angle to go along this side. We also need to figure out what is the middle of the unit, okay? So I mentioned it's going to be 4.5 inches wide, right? So what's half of 4.5? Okay, so half of 4 is 2.5. 2.25, all right? Here comes your quilt math. So 2.25 should be the center of this unit, right? We want it to be the center of that unit. So 2.25 here, okay, we're going down there, and 2.25 here. So this little dot here, I know it might be hard for you to see, but that little dot there, I want to place it right down at the corner, or not the corner, but right down at the center, okay, of that V shape, the center of the goose. And that 45-degree angle wants to run right up along that seam. So you have to move things around a wee little bit here to get everything the way you want. Okay, so that looks good. Now you need to check something else as well. You need to check that you've got 2.5 inches of fabric. Okay, so here's my 2.5 inch line. I want to make sure that I've got 2.5 inches when I go to trim, that I've got more than 2.5 inches, I should say. And same with the 4.5. So here's my 4.5 inch line. I have lots of extra fabric there, okay, before I start doing any trimming whatsoever, all right? And I'm just going to think again, because it's always good to go and think again before you start cutting. So half of 4.5, 2.25, okay? 2.25 here, 2.25 here. There's my little dot right in the center, my 45-degree line running up the side. I know I've got more fabric than 2.5 here and more fabric than 4.5 there. I'm good to start cutting, okay? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, you cut off too much and you have to make another one, right? Okay, so it's not the end of the world. Might be the end of some of your fabric, but hey. Okay, so we're going to cut along the side and we're going to cut along the top, okay? Now my ruler might have moved slightly there on me, so if it did, make sure yours doesn't. It's hard with acrylic rulers sometimes, but anyway, let's make sure we're doing okay here still. Yes, okay, we're still okay. Whew. All right. So the next thing you need to do is you need to take your flying geese, I'll never say it right, your flying geese unit, and turn it the other way. Okay, so now we've got, it looks like a little mountain, okay, or a triangle, right? And this time, because we've already trimmed this edge, we can just line our ruler up with what it is supposed to be. So 4.5 inches the one way and 2.5 the other. So I can line that up, and we're going to do some more trimming, right? So let me just get this all set up the way I want it to. That looks good. And we're going to do some more trimming. So I've trimmed off this side here. And this side, I have very little to trim off, really just that dog ear. I'll run it along just in case. Maybe little slivers, but that's basically it. Little tiny bits on that side. So now you'll have your flying geese unit. That should be 2.5 inches one way and 4.5 the other. It's looking good. Here's 2.5. 4.5 is there. So you can see when I put it on my ruler, of course you can use your cutting mat to measure. And you'll also notice when you're doing this that you'll have at least, well, it should be exactly a 1/4 inch here, a good healthy 1/4 inch from the tip there of the goose to the edge of your block as well, so that when you go to put it into your project and you run it along, you're going to get a nice point there, right, that you don't cut off your point. All right, so I need to do the same thing with all the rest of them, is trim them up, but I would then have 4 flying geese from 1 piece of fabric for the goose and 4 pieces of fabric for the wings. And as I said, you can easily adjust this for whatever size you want to make by taking the finished measurement of your block, adding 1.25 inches to the smallest measurement, in this case 2 inches, and adding 1.75 inches to the largest measurement, in this case 4 inches. I have some tips for you, but before I get to those, I want to say a big thank you and give a shout out to my Patchwork Pals YouTube channel members. Those are quilters who, for a small monthly fee, support the Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel, and they get great perks as well. One of which is getting early access to all of my videos. So if you're interested in becoming a Patchwork Pal and supporting the Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel membership, click on the join button that you'll find below any of my videos. You'll get all the details. You could even become a Patchwork Pal today. Now let's talk about some tips when you're using this technique for making flying geese. So the first tip, I would say, in a lot of cases when you're doing cutting, and we're doing quite a bit of cutting with this one, is to starch your fabric. So I like to use the Easy Press solution. You can find out more about it by looking up above or in the description below. I use it in almost all my videos. I'm sure you've seen them, but it's a great tip, a great tool to have in your studio. So that's the first thing, starch your fabrics well. The second tip, of course, when you're making flying geese, is to make sure there's a contrast between the 2 fabrics in it so that you can see the flying geese unit. And the third tip, and I've shown you this today, is to make the unit bigger and then trim it down. You get much more accurate results. There's very little fabric waste, as you can see, and it just is a better way to do it, in my opinion. In today's video, I've shown you how to do 4 flying geese at one time, and you might be wondering, have I made a project using flying geese? Well, yes, I have, and don't worry, I've got information on that for you. Just check out this video, for all the details. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.